Alright, ratio word problems, which they say they're implied ratios here, which means you're supposed to assume that they are. But anyway, let's think about how we'd solve a ratio problem in general. What is a ratio? A ratio is nothing other than a fraction, okay? So, right, we can put that here, right? A ratio is simply a fraction. Okay, so ratio, right, is pretty much a fraction. We know what fractions are, right? Fractions are something over something else. So if I'm going to solve these word problems, let me just write a couple steps here. The first thing I want you to do is write down your units. Okay, you say, what units? Meters or something? Well, it could be. But if I think about the simplest ratio is that if I'm baking or something, I have flour and sugar, so I could use an F and an S, or I could just write out the whole thing and say flour, sugar, okay? And I could write over one another. And then, if they give me some numbers, which they should, right, I'm going to fill in the ratio. I'll fill in with numbers. Okay. And then what am I going to do next? Well, I guess this other one, I said fill in with numbers. This is really my ratio numbers. Okay, so this is my ratio that they give me. Oops, that A there is very messy here. ratio. Okay, and then if I have a ratio of flour to sugar in a recipe, then I might also have given the total amount of my flour or something like that. So then I can put the amounts in. So write the amounts. Sorry, my pen's not behaving super well right now. So anyway, that's amounts. And then what's my last thing? Well, my last thing is to find the multiplier. Well, what is a multiplier? We're just going to talk about that in a second here, but find the multiplier. Because if I have some sort of flour to sugar ratio and I know I only have 3 cups of flour, I can only make that much of my recipe. And the multiplier and answer. My A there is not. My E too. This pen gave me a little trouble. Okay, so anyway, find the answers. Now let's think about the example they gave me. They gave me an example here, example 1, and they said what? If you're reading along with me, they said that I have 2.5 eggs to make 140 cookies. So 2.5 eggs, 140 cookies. So I could get lost in the numbers for a second, or I say, oh well, this is eggs and cookies, and that's not very many eggs to make cookies anyway. But anyway, my units are going to be eggs and cookies. So I have eggs like this, right? And then I have on the bottom of my ratio, because the ratio is nothing other than a fraction, and I have eggs and cookies. There's my units. That's pretty simple, right? Now what's my second step? Well, my second step is to fill in with numbers. Okay, and I'm still in that first sentence. So then I say, okay, well, the eggs, how many eggs did I have? I had 2.5 eggs. And how many cookies did I have? I had 140 cookies. That's a crazy amount of cookies for 2.5 eggs. But I guess they're eggless pretty much. And then what do? Well, Jenny wants to make 1,680 cookies. So there's 1,680 cookies. Okay, so that's a lot of cookies. Let me fix my cookies so it's a little bit easier to read. Cookies. Well, cookies doesn't say anything about the eggs, but it said how many eggs does she need, right? So the eggs is my question mark, right? So I say, how many eggs do I need? Well, I don't know exactly, but I know that I can fill in my amounts here. So now I can say here, so might be new to you. I don't know if you learned this way before, but this is my multiplication column here. Actually, make it a tiny bit bigger here. My multiplication column, and I say that I need to multiply something right here, and then it gets to my last column, which is my equals column. Well, my 1,680 cookies goes here, and in order to get to 1,680 cookies, I had to multiply 140 by something, okay? So then to figure this out, then I say, well, what is 1,680 divided by, what, you probably guessed it, by 140. And if I divide this out, I get 12, okay? And so if I get 12, right, that means that my 12 simply drops in here, right? And then I can do 12 by my 2.5 as well. Okay, and what is 12 times 2.5? Well, you can work this out, right? But 2.5 as a fraction is 5/2. And if I multiply by 12, that means I have 12/1, right? And so then I have, well, I can reduce this as well to make it a little bit easier. It's a pretty simple problem anyway. But I know that 2 goes into both of these, so this becomes a 1, this becomes a 6. And I need how many cookies? Well, I need 6 times 5, so the top of my fraction becomes 30, and the bottom is 1, right? So, oops, 0 needs to be fixed here. 30 cookies. So then I can finish this in a very visual way, and I can put 30 here, and then I can even put that I have 30 cookies if I want to. And then, since this is my answer, they did not ask for anything else, then I can box in my answer like this. Alright, so again, in review, if I have these ratio word problems or implied ratios, I'm going to remember that ratios are fractions. I can write the units, so I wrote eggs over cookies. I can fill in the numbers, the ratio, and then I can write the amounts, and then I can find the multiplier, which is this column right here. Okay, so this is my multiplication column. I'm going to put an M above it just to remind myself what it is. Okay, but that's my multiplication column, and then I think we're set. Right, so hopefully it can apply to another problem that you have in the practice or in the lesson here.